On July 16, 2012, Jon Lord drew his last breath at the London clinic after a pulmonary embolism, just as his battle with pancreatic cancer had forced him to cancel a performance he himself had written. One of the greatest architects of hard rock did not leave this world on stage, but in a hospital room, so quietly that many fans only realized it when the press had already used the words, "has passed away." Yet the man who made the Hammond C3 roar through Marshall stacks like a metal weapon was the one who always remained seated. He did not smash his organ, did not leap onto amplifiers, did not construct a rock god myth for himself. He simply placed his hands on the keys. And Deep Purple had a sky into which Ritchie Blackmore could hurl his lightning bolt riffs into history. Jon Lord's talent was a combination most believed impossible. The discipline of Bach and the instinct of the blues, symphonic form and hard rock, structure and eruption. That very difference also drove him into years of quiet tension in the studio, where two musical philosophies collided night after night, and each album became a tug-of-war. Who was Jon Lord that he dared to place rock beside a full orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, only to choose to leave Deep Purple in 2002 with a brief announcement, carrying with him an unspoken wound that left its traces only in the music that followed? This is the story of a silent revolution, and the price paid by a man who spent his entire life building the foundation for the noise. The silence Jon Lord carried throughout his life was not a random choice. It was formed from a foundation laid very early, very solid, and very disciplined. He was born on June 9, 1941, in Leicester, at a time when Britain was still living under the shadow of war. That industrial city had no dazzling lights, no grand artistic aura, only stern streets and a steady rhythm of life. In that setting, family became his first world, and then music appeared as a natural part of daily existence rather than a distant luxury dream. His father, Reginald Lord, played saxophone in local jazz bands. He was not famous, had no major recording contracts, but whenever the saxophone echoed through their home, young Jon sensed something beyond ordinary life. Sound could change the atmosphere. Sound could make people stop. From those simple moments, Jon understood that music was not merely melody. It was structure. It was breath. It was the way human beings arrange their emotions. He began studying classical piano at a young age under the guidance of Frederick Alt. The exercises of Bach and Beethoven, the scales repeated until his hands grew tired, did not bring immediate applause, but they forged in him what hard rock would later desperately need: the ability to control intensity and to build crescendos through logic. Jon did not learn music through impulse. He learned it through repetition, through precision, through reading full scores the way an engineer reads blueprints. While his peers were beginning to fall in love with pop and rock spreading across Britain, Jon immersed himself in pages dense with notation, where every note had its place and its meaning. At Wigston Grammar School, he was known as a serious student, participating in choir and amateur theater productions. The stage came to him early, but not in the form of stardom, rather as a member of a whole. He learned to listen to others before raising his own voice, learned to keep time instead of occupying all the space. For a period, Jon even tried stepping into a more stable path by working as a clerk in a law office. The job was regular, safe, fitting the mold of a reasonable life. Yet each day spent within that orderly routine only made the music inside him grow more intense. In the evenings, after work, he still returned to the keyboard, not for entertainment, but to breathe. It was in those quiet hours of practice that something essential gradually took shape. Jon Lord did not merely want to play music. He wanted to understand it, to bend it, to lay foundations, strong enough that one day, no matter how fiercely the guitar might scream, no matter how violently the stage might tremble, beneath it all there would remain a structure that could not collapse. Music pulled him away from the desk at the law office, and London became an invitation he could not refuse. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the British capital was not only changing its sound, but the heartbeat of an entire generation. Jazz slipped into cellars, rock and roll flooded the radio waves, experimental theater shattered every old convention. Jon entered that city with a bold decision. He did not arrive as a musician, but enrolled at the Central School of Speech and Drama. He wanted to understand the stage from the inside, to know how a character is constructed, how emotion is directed. He graduated in 1964, appeared in the television series Emergency, Ward 10, and during that period the name Jon was shortened to Jon. A small change, yet almost a way of separating himself from an earlier version. By day, he studied acting. By night, he sat at the keyboard in smoke-filled nightclubs, playing piano and organ until his hands ached and his ears rang. There was no spotlight, only long nights exchanged for rent money and a little more skill. Being a session musician meant adapting instantly. Blues 1 hour, ballad the next, then back to jazz. That very flexibility began to soften the classical structure within him, allowing it to breathe within a modern pulse. He was captivated by Wild Bill Davis and Jimmy Smith, men who turned the organ from a church instrument into something that could roar like an engine. Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly showed him that the stage was not only technique, but energy. Yet what truly haunted Jon was the Hammond running through a Leslie speaker. The swirling, so thick sound with a physical sensation, as if pushing the air itself. He listened to Vanilla Fudge and realized the organ could stand shoulder to shoulder with the guitar in a rock band. Under the guidance of Graham Bond, one of Britain's organ pioneers, Jon began refining his technique, searching for a way to make his sound both precise and weighty. In the early 1960s, he played with the Bill Ashton Combo, a jazz ensemble that gave him the chance to sharpen his improvisational skills. Then came groups connected to the Artwoods and the long, provocative name St. Valentine's Day Massacre, a reflection of an era drawn to boldness. With Santa Barbara Machine Head alongside Ronnie Wood, Jon experimented with instrumental pieces centered on the keyboard, like sketches for something larger waiting to take shape. When he replaced Billy Day in The Flower Pot Men, he joined the tour promoting Let's Go to San Francisco, yet was not included in the recording. It was the kind of quiet disappointment. You stand on stage, but your trace is not preserved. It was on those journeys that Jon met Nick Simper, a meeting that would open the next chapter, where every musical collision, every aesthetic conflict, every sleepless London night would be compressed into a sound strong enough to shake an entire generation. It was during those tours that left no lasting imprint that another opportunity unexpectedly appeared. Chris Curtis, who had once played with Jon, spoke to Tony Edwards about the idea of forming a new band and needing financial backing to make it real. Edwards was not an artist, he was a businessman. Together with Ron Heyer and John Coletta, he founded HEC Enterprises with the ambition of investing seriously in music, not merely as a trend, but as a business. Yet what caught Edwards' attention was not the loud names, but a quiet man with a clear structural mind, Jon Lord. Curtis quickly revealed his instability, causing the initial plan to waver. Rehearsals were interrupted, ideas left unfinished, impulses threatening to collapse the project before it had truly begun. Amid the disorder, Jon remained at the keyboard, calm, focused, as if he believed music must have its own axis of rotation. Edward saw in him a different kind of sensibility, not showmanship, but the ability to keep everything standing. Curtis exited the picture. The idea of a band did not die. It simply shifted its center. Ritchie Blackmore was invited to join, a sharp-edged session guitarist, ambitious and unafraid to display a powerful ego. Blackmore's arrival immediately generated voltage in the rehearsal room. Rod Evans stepped in with a voice soft yet strong enough. Ian Pace brought precise and decisive drumming. In March 1968, the first lineup was formed: Lord, Simper, Blackmore, Pace, Evans. They briefly called themselves Roundabout, a name suggesting the rotation of ideas and people, before choosing Deep Purple, a name evoking color rather than proclamation. The early singles and albums did not instantly explode on the UK charts. They had to tour to persuade audiences night after night. While the spotlight often converged on Blackmore, Jon gradually assumed another role. He did not compete for center stage. He built the foundation. When the guitar needed to break free, he held the rhythm. When the vocal required space, he expanded the harmony. The way he accepted being the sonic pillar meant many listeners did not realize they were hearing an architect, not merely a keyboardist. Alongside Deep Purple, Jon continued entering the studio for other projects, working with Derek Lawrence in sessions that included Blackmore, Pace, and even Chas Hodges. Those recordings were not always credited in large letters, but they were laboratories where Jon experimented with the weight of the organ, the interplay between drum patterns and blocks of sound. He began to think of rock as a multi-story construction. Beneath the riff lay the harmonic foundation. Beneath the harmony lay the structure. And if the structure was strong enough, the band could go farther than any chart position. While Deep Purple was still searching for its true shape, Jon Lord began doing something no one had asked for, and yet no one could later ignore. In the late 1960s, and when the Moog and other synthesizers were becoming new symbols of sonic progress, many artists rushed toward futuristic tones as a declaration of modernity. Keith Emerson was setting stages ablaze with towering electronic synth textures. That path was wide open, fashionable, safe, in an artistic sense. Jon looked at it and turned in another direction. He did not search for a new sound by adding equipment, but by breaking the limits of what he already had. The Hammond C3 had been born for churches and jazz clubs. Jon dragged it through Marshall amplifiers, built for electric guitars, and pushed the volume to the point where the organ no longer accompanied, but roared. The sound distorted. Not an accident, a choice. The distortion from the Marshall gave the Hammond body weight, a physical sensation like a block of metal vibrating. When Blackmore struck a riff, Jon did not step aside. He stood level, confronting him, creating a tug-of-war between strings and keys that made the studio air feel taut as steel wire. To prevent the organ from breaking apart under such intensity, he developed a legato-driven style. He pulling notes into one another on an instrument not naturally designed to feel continuous. Those who later tried to copy that sound often reproduced only the distortion, not the inner flow. It was precisely that combination of classical technique and sonic violence that made Jon Lord one of the pioneering keyboardists of hard rock. He expanded his palette further with the RMI 368 electric piano and harpsichord, so that in Demon's Eye or Space Truckin', the sound was not only heavy but sharp, with edges and angles. But Jon's ambition did not stop at making the organ louder. He wanted to attempt something many considered insane: to place rock and symphony within the same structure without either side bowing. Concerto for Group and Orchestra was born from that context. 3 movements, a rock band, standing beside a full orchestra. On September 24, 1969, at the Royal Albert Hall, Deep Purple, now featuring Ian Gillan and Roger Glover, stepped onto the stage alongside the orchestra, with the BBC filming the entire event. Many expected an awkward hybrid. What they witnessed instead was a bold yet calculated experiment, where Jon's classical structure was not diluted and rock was not softened for easy listening. The album, released at the end of 1969, created not only artistic impact but significantly expanded Deep Purple's reach. Jon did not write the concerto to seek academic approval, nor to prove rock required elevation. He wanted to test whether two worlds, long considered opposites, could share a single foundation. And when the doors of the Royal Albert Hall closed that night, Jon Lord was no longer merely the man behind a distorted Hammond. He had become the one willing to stake the band's reputation on an idea that, if it failed, could have turned Deep Purple into a joke. If it succeeded, it would change how people saw rock. After Royal Albert Hall, Deep Purple did not retreat to savor success. They charged straight into another direction, fiercer, heavier, less compromising. Deep Purple in Rock, released in 1970, landed like a fist slammed on a table. The cover carved the band's faces into a Mount Rushmore-style cliff, and inside was a sound that asked permission from no one. Speed King opened with an organ stretched to its limit before the guitar slashed in like a blade. In Bloodsucker, Jon and Blackmore did not merely play together, they confronted one another. This was not surface-level rivalry, but two musical philosophies colliding head-on. Blackmore favored short, direct riffs, arrows shot straight at a target. Jon expanded harmony, lengthened the internal motion of melody as if composing a development section in a sonata. Yet that difference was not hidden. It was exposed in every improvisation, in solos extended to the point where the studio air could grow dense. Child in Time revealed Jon's essence most clearly. The organ intro built a wall of tense sound, repeating and gradually lifting pitch before Ian Gillan's voice shattered like a scream compressed too long. No opening guitar riff, no pounding drums, only organ, slow and cold, constructing a climax through structure. In Hard Lovin' Man, Jon experimented with overlapping sound layers, including passages simulating a police siren as a dramatic effect, pushing the song beyond conventional rock radio boundaries. The years that followed were a rapid succession of albums. Machine Head in 1972 brought Deep Purple to global prominence. Smoke on the Water, with its legendary guitar riff, was anchored by a thick and solid organ foundation. Space Truckin' became a playground for extended passages where Jon pushed effects and distortion higher. Highway Star and Lazy displayed solos where the organ was no longer a supporting instrument but central to the structure. When Made in Japan was released the same year, audiences heard not a tidy studio version but the band's live force, where Jon and Blackmore could stretch a solo until it became a test of nerves. Who Do We Think We Are, in 1973, carried palpable tension. Rat Bat Blue showed Jon driving effects to extremes, dense layers of sound like an electronic storm. A Burn in 1974 reinforced the band's standing in the hard rock wave, despite lineup changes. Synth appeared sparingly, as in A200, used selectively rather than as a compulsory trend. By Come Taste the Band, Jon continued experimenting yet maintained restraint, ensuring the synth in Love Child did not overwhelm the sonic identity already defined. Amid all the commercial success and relentless touring, Deep Purple's electricity did not come from volume alone. It came from philosophical opposition. Blackmore wanted to streamline, cut excess, focus on the spear's tip. Jon wanted expansion, layering, depth. There were no public shouting matches, but in the studio, every decision about song structure could become an hours-long tug-of-war. That friction created a sound at once focused like a punch and wide like a vaulted dome. In 1973, when Jon's old Hammond C3 was severely damaged after relentless touring, he was forced to find another instrument. He purchased a Hammond from Christine McVie of Fleetwood Mac. Technician Mike Phillips helped modify and integrate it into a hybrid instrument suited to Jon's amplification system. And that organ stayed with him for decades, from vast arenas to the most intense recording sessions. When he left Deep Purple in 2002, the Hammond was passed on to Don Airey. After some time in use, however, it could hardly endure further performance strain. Like Jon's own journey, that instrument carried the marks of thousands of nights when sound was pushed to its limit, where each note was not merely tone, but the impact force between two musical worlds that had never fully become one. As Deep Purple grew heavier and more aggressive, another part of Jon Lord moved in the opposite direction, not to escape rock, but to continue the question he had first posed on the night of the Royal Albert Hall. The concerto was not an impulsive moment. It opened a door Jon had no intention of closing. Gemini Suite was born from a BBC commission, then developed into a solo album in 1972. There, Jon no longer had to negotiate every note with guitar or vocal lines. He wrote for orchestra, yet retained a trace of electric energy within the structure. Each movement resembled a musical portrait of individual band members, but placed within a symphonic context. He did not abandon rock. He translated it into another language, by windows. In 1974, that ambition became more complex. Jon experimented with structure and orchestration, on allowing the orchestra not merely to decorate, but to function as an equal conversational force. Slow movements, dense string layers, then suddenly a powerful motif carrying the breath of rock. All of it like an internal dialogue between two worlds he refused to choose between. Sarabande in 1975 continued deepening that direction. The album bore a clear structural design, sections named as in a Baroque suite, yet inside still pulsed the strong heartbeat of a man who had once stood at the center of hard rock stages. Alongside these symphonic works, Jon did not drift far from his comrades. In March 1974, he joined Ian Paice and Tony Ashton to form First of the Big Bands. In rehearsals, Jon's organ did not compete, but supported Ashton's soulful vocals. Guest musicians like Peter Frampton stepped in, creating an atmosphere both free and ambitious. From that emerged Paice-Ashton-Lord, and Malice in Wonderland in 1977 carried a tone markedly different from Deep Purple. More bluesy, more flexible, less heavy, yet no less refined. Jon also contributed to projects by Maggie Bell and Nazareth, demonstrating he could thicken a heavy rock track without turning it into something overloaded. By the late 1970s, when Deep Purple disbanded, Jon entered a new phase. In 1978, he joined Whitesnake under David Coverdale. The reason was partly practical, tied to financial matters upon returning to England, yet the decision placed him in a different position. No longer a co-founder, but a member within an already defined structure. In Whitesnake, Jon enriched the blues rock texture with the Yamaha CP70 and selectively layered synths. He helped lay the foundation for songs like Here I Go Again and Wine, Women, and Song, where keyboards did not show off, but gave the melody depth. Still, the feeling of being seen at times as a hired musician occasionally crept into his mind, a man who had once built an entire sonic style now stepping back behind the lights. On April 16, 1984, he played his final show with Whitesnake on Swedish television. There was no public drama, But it marked yet another moment when Jon had to recalibrate his position within a rapidly changing rock landscape. Earlier, in 1982, he had released Before I Forget, a solo album blending mainstream rock with classically infused piano ballads. Voices such as Vicki Brown, Sam Brown, and Elmer Gantry wove into the musical layers Jon composed, alongside the contributions of Simon Phillips, Cozy Powell, and Mick Ralphs. The album did not explode on the charts like contemporaneous releases, yet it revealed a Jon Lord unwilling to be confined. In 1984, he composed the score for Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady, conducted by Alfred Ralston. The music here softened, pastoral, and like a necessary pause after years of volume pushed to its limits. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, Jon appeared in numerous projects. He worked with George Harrison, David Gilmour, Cozy Powell, participated in productions such as Wind in the Willows, appeared in the film Whitefire. He made a brief appearance in the 1985 film Water alongside Eric Clapton, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, a small moment that nevertheless showed he remained within a network of major names. In the Olympic rock and blues circus led by Pete York, he toured primarily in Germany, taking part in programs such as Super Drumming, where technique and versatility were placed at the forefront. On all those stages, Jon did not need to prove who he was. He stood slightly behind, keeping time, adding harmonic layers, adjusting intensity. Even when not in the central spotlight, his presence invariably altered the entire band's sonic quality. And each time he stepped off stage, he carried with him the same enduring question: how can structure and emotion coexist without canceling each other out? As the separate detours gradually came full circle, 1984 brought Jon Lord back to where the storm had once begun. Deep Purple Mark II reunited, and the atmosphere of a major comeback swept across Europe. The tour stretched on, stages expanded, audiences packed tightly as if time itself had never fractured. And Knebworth in 1985 became one of the most frequently recalled nights. The exact audience numbers have been told differently over the years, but what no one denies is that the sea of people was vast enough to make the ground tremble. Amid the colossal roar, Jon once again sat at his instrument as he had 2 decades earlier. Yet the man was no longer the same. In Knocking at Your Back Door, the classically tinged keyboard layers surfaced more clearly, as though he deliberately reasserted his identity within a band reaffirming its hard rock power. Yet behind the light of reunion, a quiet fatigue began to emerge. In the late 1990s, Jon gradually turned inward. His mother passed away in 1995, leaving a void that no volume could fill. Pictured Within, released in 1997 and recorded in Cologne, carried tones both unfamiliar and gentle, hints of Algerian breath, the chill of alpine air, and more silence than audiences had been accustomed to. He signed with Virgin Classics, a choice that felt like a declaration that the classical path was no temporary diversion. Wait a While, later interpreted by Sissel, carried his music into a different space where emotion did not need to shout. In 2002, after a tour in the UK, Jon decided to leave Deep Purple. A knee injury was the immediate reason, but the decision was not merely physical. And it was a difficult severing from the part of life that had defined his name. Don Airey stepped in as his replacement. The departure came without dramatic statements or public conflict, yet for Jon it was a profound and not easily borne experience. That exit later left traces in his compositions, where longing and serenity coexisted. From 2003 onward, Jon entered what was perhaps the most honest phase of his life. Beyond the Notes, recorded in Bonn in the summer of 2004 and produced by Mario Argandona, bore a distinctly introspective tone, as though a man who had lived through thousands of nights with sound pushed to its limits had discovered the strength of silence. He collaborated with Frida of ABBA on The Sun Will Shine Again, composed and performed symphonic works such as Boom of the Tingling Strings, first premiered in 2003, and Disguise's Suite for String Orchestra. He returned to R&B and blues in Live in the Basement with Jimmy Barnes, touching once more the influences that had shaped him at the beginning. Jon's music during this period was not withdrawn. He performed at charitable events such as the Sunflower Jam Healing Trust in 2006, standing alongside Paul Weller, Robert Plant, and Phil Manzanera. Recordings of Boom of the Tingling Strings and Disguises Suite were released in 2008. With the Hoochie Coochie Men, he participated in Danger White Man Dancing, recorded in London and released in 2007. That same year, he received a commission to compose the Durham Concerto for the 175th anniversary of Durham University, premiering it at Durham Cathedral, a space that brought his playing closer again to its symphonic roots. Jon maintained strong bonds with fellow artists. He played piano on George Harrison's 2002 album Brainwashed, often visiting Friar Park. His friendship with Sir John Mortimer led to Notice Such Things in 2010, a work dedicated to his late friend. The album quickly entered the UK classical charts, reaching number 4 within days of release and drawing attention across online rankings. Those numbers were not as loud as rock charts, yet they reflected professional respect. In the final years before illness surrounded him, Jon accepted the commission to write Concerto for Hammond Organ and Orchestra, scheduled for premiere in spring 2012. In July 2011, at Sunflower Jam, he gave his last live performance, premiering a collaborative work with Rick Wakeman. Plans for a joint recording were discussed, ideas left unfinished, and he also took part in the Who Cares project, alongside several major names. When he had to cancel a performance of the Durham Concerto in 2012 to undergo treatment, Jon had already re-recorded Concerto for Group and Orchestra in 2011. Post-production was completed later and released as a CD/DVD. The Hammond that once roared through Marshalls now stood beside string sections in stillness. And within that silence, Jon Lord no longer had to compete with anyone. He only needed to write, as he had begun, with structure, with depth, and with a heart that had completed the full arc of its own journey. When the relentless tours of the early 1970s swept him across America, Japan, and Europe in a cycle that seemed almost without pause, Jon Lord's private life was forced to compress itself into narrow spaces between 2 flights, 2 recording sessions, 2 shows that stretched past midnight. In 1969, when Concerto for Group and Orchestra resounded beneath the dome of the Royal Albert Hall, and his name was spoken as the man who dared to place rock beside a symphony orchestra, Jon married Judith Feldman. And it was a moment both radiant and fragile. He entered marriage while his career was accelerating, while family life demanded a slower, steadier rhythm, a daily presence. Their daughter Sarah was born as Deep Purple recorded and toured relentlessly. In those years, Jon was in motion more often than at home. Daytime meant the studio, nighttime the stage, early morning the airport. There were times he returned when the house was already dark, stepping quietly past the children's room so as not to wake his child. He was not flamboyant, nor the type of artist entangled in loud scandals, yet it was the repeated absence that eroded. The distance between them did not form from a single dramatic event, but from hundreds of nights away, hundreds of meals eaten alone. Fame did not shatter the marriage in sensational fashion. It simply pulled him too far from ordinary life. By 1975, they divorced. There were no public lawsuits, no media battles, only the acceptance that the rhythm no longer held its original structure. Jon remained silent, as he always did in professional conflicts. A few years later, within a circle connected to the band, Jon met Victoria "Vicky" Gibbs. She had previously been involved with Glenn Hughes and was the twin sister of Jackie Pace, wife of Ian Pace, so their connection did not arise from chance, but from an understanding of the world Jon inhabited. Vicky entered his life after he had endured a broken marriage, and after he had learned the cost of letting music claim all his time. They married in the late 1970s, in circumstances far less flamboyant than the fevered years of his early rise. Their daughter Amy was born, and Burntwood Hall in Goring-on-Thames became their home. The estate was spacious, with lawns wide enough for cricket, tree-lined paths, a still lake, and in the living room a Challen baby grand once owned by Shirley Bassey. The space reflected Jon himself, elegant without ostentation, private without being closed. Evenings there were often quiet. Artist friends would visit to listen to a new composition, exchange ideas, drink tea or wine, rather than host noisy parties. Vicky later founded Sunflower Jam, a charity that brought together many major artists, and Jon participated not as a rock icon, but as a friend willing to play for a compassionate cause. Within that house, he did not need to be the Hammond legend or compete in volume with guitars. He was a composed husband, a father more present, and a gentleman described by friends as refined, kind, principled. The roaring Marshall sound stopped at the gate. Inside remained only the soft resonance of piano keys, enough to keep life from being swept away once more. Jon, in family life, stood in stark contrast to the roaring sonic force on stage. He did not construct a rock god persona, did not cultivate a personal myth. Those who worked with and spoke to him often mentioned his courtesy, intellect, empathy, and a quiet sense of humor. Frida of Aba described him as a true gentleman, calm, respectful of others, preserving his integrity within an industry filled with temptation. At Burntwood Hall, amid rustling leaves and warm lamplight, Jon found what Marshall walls could never provide: a silence deep enough to heal the years worn down by touring, and a family structure strong enough to welcome him home after every journey. In July 2011, while compositions and performances still stretched forward on his calendar, Jon received a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and he did not turn the news into a tragic proclamation. He entered treatment in England and later in Israel, remaining as private as he had been throughout decades in a noisy industry. His health declined, yet his will to work did not. He managed to complete the re-recording of Concerto for Group and Orchestra in 2011. Post-production was finalized in 2012. In July 2011 at Sunflower Jam, Jon stepped onto the stage for the final time. No longer the man competing in volume with guitars, he sat at the keyboard with quiet concentration, as if aware that his time was narrowing. On July 16, 2012, Jon Lord passed away at the London clinic. The immediate cause was a pulmonary embolism against the backdrop of pancreatic cancer. His death was not loud, yet it sent shockwaves through both the rock and classical communities. The two worlds he had spent his life connecting. He was laid to rest at the new cemetery of St. Mary the Virgin Church in Hambledon, a peaceful setting befitting a man who had sought stillness in his final years. 2 years later, on April 4, 2014, the Royal Albert Hall once again resonated with his music in a memorial concert. Deep Purple stood on stage alongside Bob Harris, Paul Weller, Bruce Dickinson, Alfie Boe, Jeremy Irons, Rick Wakeman, Joe Brown, Glenn Hughes, Miller Anderson, Steve Balsamo, and many others. The orchestra was conducted by Paul Mann, who had long been associated with Jon's symphonic works. The atmosphere that night was not merely remembrance of a band member, but tribute to a man who had expanded the boundaries of rock. In late 2012, a campaign to install a blue plaque at Jon's childhood home in Leicester received the support of Mayor Sir Peter Soulsby, recognizing his contributions to contemporary music and to the city where he grew up. In April 2016, Jon Lord was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of Deep Purple, a recognition that arrived after his passing. In May 2019, he was further honored with the Ivor Novello Award for International Achievement, alongside the remaining Mark II members at the Grosvenor House Hotel in London. Jon's music did not end with ceremonies. Concerto for Group and Orchestra continued to be performed on international stages. Paul Mann served as conductor for many years, bringing the work back to Europe and to Brazil in March to April 2023, with performances in Bucharest, Sofia, Zagreb, São Paulo, and other cities. Bruce Dickinson handled the vocal parts, alongside symphony orchestras and rock musicians, recreating the structure Jon had once envisioned, two parallel worlds not excluding one another. The Hammond that once roared through Marshalls now stood among strings and woodwinds, retaining its identity, carrying the imprint of a man no longer present on stage, yet still guiding the musical flow through the structure he left behind. Jon Lord's legacy does not lie in how fast he played, nor in how many watts of guitar his Hammond could overpower. It lies in how he transformed the role of the keyboard in hard rock. Before him, the organ often stood behind, coloring, filling space. After him, it could confront the electric guitar directly, could build a wall of sound thick enough to lead an entire band. Plugging a Hammond C3 into Marshall amplifiers was not merely a technical trick. It was an aesthetic decision that opened a new chapter for 1970s rock. Generations of keyboardists afterward, from progressive to metal, have had to contend with the sonic shadow he erected. Alongside that stands a quieter but more enduring contribution. He proved that rock did not need permission to enter the symphonic space. Concerto for Group and Orchestra was not an isolated experiment of the late 1960s. It became a living work, continuing to be performed decades after his death. The idea that two musical worlds could share the same structure, the same breath, was a conviction Jon pursued until the end of his life, from Gemini Suite, Sarabande, to his final contemplative compositions. Within Deep Purple, he was the foundation layer, accepting the role of keeping time so others could shine, yet whenever the organ rose, no one could mistake whose voice it was. Beyond Deep Purple, he left his mark in Whitesnake, in symphonic projects, in charitable performances, in solo albums that delved inward. And he did not construct a reckless persona, did not cultivate personal myth through scandal. He chose discipline, structure, and composure. Looking back on that journey, what remains is not only hits like Smoke on the Water or Child in Time, but the way one man could move from the roar of Marshall amplifiers to the quiet spaces of string sections without losing his identity. Jon Lord did not seek to become the center of the spotlight. He created the space in which music could speak for itself. If you have ever felt chills when the opening organ swells before the guitar storm crashes in, share that moment in the comments below. Like and subscribe so we can continue exploring together the lives that changed music history. Not only through volume, but through vision.